Hi, I'm Kim Vanel in Wanganui, New Zealand. It's Monday, January 19th. Today, soldiers are put on standby for anti-ICE protests in Minneapolis. The EU looks to diplomacy first over Trump's Greenland tariff threats, but prepares retaliatory measures just in case. World leaders head to Davos for the World Economic Forum. And China wants to make it as easy as possible to have kids after another year of declining birth rates. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes, 7 days a week. The Pentagon has put about 1,500 soldiers in Alaska on standby for a possible deployment to Minnesota, where people have been rallying daily against the stepped-up deportations. On Sunday, crowds in St. Paul honked and shouted as ICE agents, guns drawn, stormed a home and pulled out a man wearing only underwear and a blanket into the snowy street. Anti-ICE demonstrators have been out in force since an ICE officer shot 37-year-old Renee Good dead earlier this month. President Trump has threatened to use the Insurrection Act to bring the situation under control. And as Phil Stewart in Washington, D.C. explains, local leaders say that would only inflame tensions.
I think the big question is, if Trump were to deploy troops to Minneapolis, would we be in a whole different ballgame really at that point? Because the idea potentially could be to, really address these protests more directly. And if he invokes the Insurrection Act, that would be treating these folks as insurrectionists, which again gets into major legal issues given the right for peaceful demonstration inside the United States.
To Europe now, where diplomats are rushing to head off a tariff fight sparked by America's push to buy Greenland. After meeting in Brussels, EU ambassadors say the plan now is to try and talk President Donald Trump out of imposing new tariffs on US allies, but they're also preparing to hit back if he goes ahead. Trump has threatened duties on Denmark, Sweden, France, Germany, the Netherlands and Finland, plus Britain and Norway, until the US is allowed to purchase Greenland.
Kan man sige, rimelige amerikanske.
Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen says Europe will listen to reasonable US concerns, but won't hand over the territory. One option the EU is weighing is retaliatory tariffs. The other is the anti-coercion instrument, a tool designed to push back when the bloc feels another country is trying to apply economic pressure. Reuters Brussels chief correspondent Philip Bleckensop explains what that means.
Now, this is something that's never been used. It's ideally there as a deterrent. It offers a range of options, of countermeasures to what's called coercion or economic coercion. The argument would be that in placing tariffs on these countries, the United States would be coercing the European Union and the European countries to give in over Greenland. The options include tariffs, but they also include perhaps restrictions on access to investments, to the banking activities in the bloc, and also perhaps restrictions on the trade in services. And this may be significant because, unlike goods, the US has a trade surplus in services with regard to the EU. And of course, we can think of certain services, whether it be financial, banking, but also obviously digital services where the United States is dominant. And obviously, those companies rely on access to the European market to make their money.
And Philip says some in the EU want to go even further.
Another, which has been raised by a German lawmaker, is boycotting the World Cup, which is going to be hosted largely in the United States next year. Now, obviously, we haven't got to that point yet.
For more on how the potential tariff war is impacting markets, here's Mike Dolan from our sister Markets podcast, Morning Bid.
Hi, Kim. Yeah, as you might expect, global stock markets have fallen on this latest tariff threat from Donald Trump, this time over Greenland against 8 European allies. The European stocks are down about 1% on that news. US futures, because Wall Street's closed today for Martin Luther King Day, are also down about 1%. And probably the most interesting development has been a drop in the US dollar, which normally you'd expect to benefit from a geopolitical standoff like this. But it's interesting that the euro has rallied. And you might think that the euro at the sharp end of these tariff threats might be the one to suffer. But it's interesting that European savers and investors are very big holders of US stocks and bonds. And if there is a retaliatory trade war developing, then that could be disturbed considerably. At least that's a market concern.
Thanks, Mike. You can listen to Morning Bid wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to go even deeper on Greenland and hear more from the Danish territory itself, take a listen to our On Assignment weekend episode. There's a link in the description. The EU's push for dialogue over Greenland is set to be front and center at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which kicks off today. It's one of the most high-powered gatherings in years. 3,000 delegates from 130 countries, including 64 presidents and prime ministers. Among them is President Donald Trump, attending for the first time in 6 years. And as Reuters Europe economics editor Mark John tells us, Trump is likely to dominate many of the big themes on the agenda.
I suppose we can frame it as what exactly Trump's America means for the rest of the world. Specifically, what kind of security partner is America becoming? What kind of economic partner in terms of trade? And also potentially, given that there are these rising concerns about financial stability, what kind of partner would it be in responding to a global financial crisis if one were to emerge? The other thing that's worth mentioning, I think, is that this year we are seeing lots more oil executives coming to Davos. Traditionally, they have often had quite a small presence. I guess that will be evaluated in terms of what they are expecting to hear from Trump and others about the prospects of more fossil fuel activity. And others, of course, will be looking at in terms of what all of this means for the energy transition and the move to greener fuels.
One other issue on the agenda, Ukraine's top negotiator says that talks with the US for a resolution to the war will continue in Davos. In Spain, survivors climb out the windows of a train carriage tipped on its side after a high-speed train derailed and smashed into another oncoming train in the country's south. Dozens of people were killed and dozens more were injured, some of them seriously. The cause of the crash, which happened on a straight stretch of track, is not yet clear. China's head of the National Bureau of Statistics announcing that the country's population fell for a fourth consecutive year in 2025. It sparked a huge effort to try and get more people to have babies. Farah Master in Hong Kong has more on what Beijing is doing.
So the two key things that they're going to be spending on are the childcare subsidies, which were announced last year for the first time, and also all medical expenses through pregnancy. This would include IVF, for example, making it fully reimbursable for people going through pregnancy under insurance. So effectively, they want to ensure a no-cost pregnancy.
But beyond fertility, Farah says Beijing needs to tackle some deep-rooted issues.
Because of the one-child policy, which was in place until 2015, there's a mindset, if you like, in China where a lot of people are used to not having children or only one child. And so it's very difficult to suddenly turn this around.
And staying in China for our recommended read. And some of those government policies could be working. Data shows that marriage rates rose for the first 9 months of 2025. And our article looks at how wedding dress sellers are pinning their hopes on the trend continuing. There's a link to read more in the pod description. For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast player. If you're listening on a smart speaker, just ask for the latest news from Reuters 7 days a week. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.